Welcome to this academic session. I'm Frederik Zuiderveen-Borgesius, a law professor in the Netherlands, and I have the honor of chairing this academic session. And we have four speakers: Giulia, Eduardo, Àndrés, and if everything goes all right with time zones, etc., Chomczyk from China. We hope, and we'll see whether he will turn up. Each of them will present give their presentations. We do that all in a row, and then we open for questions and comments by you. I realize that means that, for instance, for the first speaker, you have to remember your question, but this way there's a better chance that each speaker gets enough time. And we're going to start right away with Giulia Campaioli, a postdoc at University of Amsterdam at the media department, and she has a background in psychology and anthropology. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Frederick, and thank you everyone for being here at this last academic panel. I'm sure we're all tired, but also fomented by all of these ideas and conversations that we've had these 3 or 4 days. So thank you very much for being here. Today I'm presenting this working theoretical paper that it's the first paper that we've been writing together as the DataGov project at the University of Amsterdam, an ERC-funded project that looks at how governance is shifting to data-driven infrastructures. That we've been writing with my two wonderful colleagues, Sruthi Vanguri and Mattéo Bard, and the principal investigator, Stefania Milan. And in this paper, we foreground the concept of infrastructural inequalities, and we introduced two desk-based case studies to try to understand how regulatory data infrastructures may be able to produce infrastructural inequalities. Oh, sorry. A lot of change in things. Across jurisdictions, and this is our starting point, government agencies rely on data infrastructures to govern access to welfare, healthcare, mobility, and security. Digital identity system, biometric databases, health information platforms, and interoperable migration registers are some of the data infrastructures that have become central to contemporary public administration. These are often justified in terms of efficiency, fraud prevention, and security, yet they also signal a deeper transformation in how governance is exercised. The concept of regulatory data infrastructures identify data tracking systems that produce data in an automated fashion, feeding quasi-real-time decision-making and population monitoring within the remit of state functions, such as public safety, education, public health, and population management. As regulatory data infrastructures are embedded in routine administrative practices, they reorganize the relationship between states and populations around infrastructural capacities for identification and classifications. Do these systems improve access to rights and services, or do they amplify existing structural inequalities? This is our starting point and question driving this paper. We draw from the field of critical data studies and critical infrastructure studies to examine how regulatory data infrastructures may be producing infrastructural inequalities. Our work then builds on critical data studies, which starts from the premise that data and data practices are never neutral. They're embedded in socio-technical imaginaries, institutional arrangements, and historically patterned relations of power and inequality. Datification provides the first building block for our work. As defined by Van Dijk, it's the transformation of social action into quantified data that can be tracked, compared, analyzed in real time, including for predictive purposes. Now, the relation between data and the social world is a recursive one. Data are used to act upon social life, and these interventions shape the conditions under which future data are generated. This recursive dynamic reproduces or intensifies inequality and surveillance depending on how data infrastructures are configured and governed. So, as documented by Virginia Eubanks, the introduction of these regulatory data infrastructures, such as automated eligibility systems, coordinated databases, and predictive risk models, increasingly replace human assemblages and bureaucratic systems in the assignation of rights, services, and resources. And although presented as objective, these systems produce pattern errors. Now, the notion of algorithmic bias or algorithmic discrimination captures the discriminatory outcomes generated by automated systems that disadvantage some groups compared to others, often because of biased datasets and entrenched social hierarchies. Therefore, we foreground the concept of infrastructural inequalities to expand this framing and this understanding, and we define it as the forms of inequalities and discrimination, exclusion, and oppression that originate from or depend on infrastructural arrangements. And we take a look at how these infrastructural inequalities may be produced by particularly a certain kind of data infrastructures that are these regulatory data infrastructures. We know that large segments of the populations experience inadequate access to employment, housing, education, nutrition, and healthcare. Structural inequalities is a concept that captures these durable asymmetries along lines of class, race, geography, or legal status. Now, infrastructural inequalities directs the attention to a distinct analytical layer. How this advantage is captured, then organized, stabilized, and even produced through data infrastructure themselves. Inequality becomes embedded in cables, pipes, interfaces, databases, legal mandates, and institutional arrangements. The contemporary shift toward data-driven governance has the potential to reproduce structural inequalities by infrastructure and to produce new forms of inequality that are specific to this characteristic of this infrastructure. This article then extends this line of inquiry that is concerned with algorithmic discrimination to examine regulatory data infrastructures by grounding this concept into two different case studies. So we adopt this comparative case-based design to advance our argument that regulatory infrastructures can produce infrastructural inequalities, and these function as theory-building examples, so they're not empirical case studies yet. These two case studies, the interoperable biometric border control infrastructures in the EU and the health data infrastructures under India Ayushman Bharat, the digital mission, were selected through theoretical sampling as they represent different regulatory domains, security migration on one hand, and healthcare, and distinct political institutional settings, while they also share some key characteristics that make them fall into this category of regulatory data infrastructures. For the European case, we analyze EU policy and technical documentation on the interoperability framework and the large-scale IT systems it connects, alongside official communication and secondary scholarship. For the India case, we analyze architecture and governance material on the Ayushman Bharat digital mission, including health IDs, standardized frameworks, and interoperability arrangements, complemented by policy materials. The interoperability initiative, which has been talked about a lot in these days, adopted by the European Union in 2019 and implemented by the Director General for Migration and Home Affairs, DG Home, seeks to connect all security and migration databases across the Union. These are the Entry Exit System, EES, the Visa Information System, VIS, European Travel Information and Authorization System, ETIAS, European Asylum Dactyloscopy Database, Eurodac, the Schengen Information System, SIS, and the European Criminal Recording Information System, Third Country Nationals, ECRIS TCN. Now, the goal is to allow for cross-validation for streamlined border crossing. It's presented as a solution. Connecting databases improves fraud detection. It allows for more complete security screenings and faster border crossings. However, what we argue is that it also has the possibility of producing new forms of inequality, embedding them in the architecture. Now, cremigration is a concept that foregrounds the idea of the convergence of migration and crime control, together with the enactment of the figure of the so-called cremigrant other. Migrants are structurally positioned as potential criminals. This increases the risk that vulnerabilized people, such as migrants, will be matched by accident, as biometric data valence is tied to a probabilistic matches system. Suspicion becomes sticky, meaning that a single match becomes part of a person's data profile and will repeatedly be reused in future risk assessment. The burden then falls on the individual to correct a bad data point. However, people's right to redress is reduced as interoperability distributes the data held on individual across multiple datasets. Data valence, as the systematic and large-scale gathering, analysis, and use of information and persons, is also embedded in a way in this interoperability initiative, and it's amplified through the use of biometric technologies that link identities across databases, repurposing data across contexts, and with the possibility of function creep, so a change of what the scope was at the beginning of the data collection for other functions. In this sense, interoperability is an infrastructural choice that is responsible for increasing data valence from a single event check to continuously updated checks based on cross-sectional databases. As migrant data is increasingly compared with criminal investigation, the process of immigration unfolds. This shifts inequality from discretionary decision-making to the infrastructural level, where unequal treatment is produced automatically through continuous surveillance, cross-database matching, and risk profiling that disproportionately target migrants as default security objects. Perfect. The second case study is India Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission, launched in September 21, and it functions as a regulatory data infrastructure that reorganizes health governance around data flows, standards, and interoperability requirements. A central mechanism through which this system reproduces infrastructural inequalities is data poverty, which means the inability for individuals, groups, or populations to benefit from a discovery or innovation due to the scarcity of data that adequately represent them. Now, the generation of health data under ABDM depends on digitalized hospitals and backend integration and trained administrative staff. However, these infrastructural preconditions are unevenly distributed across India's healthcare landscape, stratified along urban, rural, and formal-informal care access, so that rural healthcare facilities, peripheral clinics, and informal or community-based care providers rely on paper records, fragmented documentation practices, and limited digital infrastructure, disparities which produce data poverty at the structural level. Moreover, just to finish this case, these limited data production constraints the inclusion in risk profiling and resource planning is exacerbating marginalization over time, as these feedback loops stabilize inequality by governing through what infrastructures can see and process, making exclusion an infrastructural limitation rather than an outcome of regulatory and infrastructural design. So to conclude, I'm just gonna go here, and I just wanna conclude by saying that we have defined in this paper infrastructural inequalities as durable form of discrimination, exclusion, and vulnerabilization produced through the material, technical, legal, and organizational arrangements of infrastructures. The two cases that we present show that infrastructural inequalities are produced through different legibility regimes. In the EU case, it's hyperlegibility, as interoperability and biometric matching enable cross-domain data reuse and amplify durability of suspicion. In the case of India, the dominant mode is uneven legibility, enrollment logic, standardization, and platform-mediated access, with the implication of exclusion and data poverty for those that are least able to produce recognizable data traces. I'm gonna close it here and just keep it open for the next question and for the next speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And also thank you for your good time management. Moderators like me always enjoy that, good time management by speakers. Next speaker, Eduardo Brito, here next to me. He's a security engineer at Cybernetica AS in Estonia, and also a PhD candidate at the University of Tartu in Estonia. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Slides. Oops. Okay. Yeah. Hello. Yeah, I'm a security engineer, and in Estonia, we started this research on location as a new digital primitive. And this paper falls into the end-to-end research roadmap that we have on trying to map why is the case for treating location as a new digital primitive. And in this paper, we identify the risks, especially in Europe, for the case of location being treated as evidence-grade metadata and not just simple metadata as we have it. So to contextualize, this research came in an era where we started having this kind of content online, where you start to not be able to distinguish what is actually real or not. So you look at those pictures. Of course, there's a bit of irony on that, but the point here is that, for instance, AI generation models have become so real, so being able to create such realistic content that we start not being able to distinguish what's reality or not. And this has been the case now in adversarial environments, especially our digital place, where we are not able anymore to establish the integrity and authenticity of physical events. I can take a picture now of this room, and this same picture could be easily faked, and me faking that I was here presenting this paper. So the question is, how do we prove what is real? And this is the same question along many other lines of applications. For example, how do you prove that you've entered in a certain bus stop and you left in another one? How do you prove your actual fiscal address, so you pay taxes in a certain country? How do you prove your alibi and disprove allegations if someone wrongly accuses you of a crime? These are all location data provenance issues. And in this paper, we have identified what must hold for location or for a location claim to actually be trusted. We identified 4 integrity axes. First, saying that location data provenance is all the evidence, all the metadata, and all the governance controls that make such a location assertion contestable under dispute. So for me to claim that I'm here in this room, somebody would have to dispute this and be able to contest the truthness of the fact of me being here presenting this to you. So this eventually is a claim about whether we can evaluate where and when something has occurred, so the claim integrity, who or what produced the claim, in this case the integrity of the evidence, under which constraints, so the controls that we have over the evidence, in this case the picture that I take of this room proving that I'm here, and with which audit and retention guarantees is especially useful if you transfer the claim to some platform that eventually is the one attesting to you being true about your facts. So these are the 4 integrity axes that must hold true for a location claim to be trusted. However, a lot of these axes have been violated in many recurring failure modes that we have also identified, starting, for example, from fabricated locality, which we see a lot in social media, where people claim to be from some country and they post some narrative about some other country. For example, replay and recontextualization is actually a phenomenon that has emerged now in a lot of armed conflicts, where people reuse footage of older wars or other scenarios and they claim, well, that something is true based on that. Then we have, for example, proxying and delegation control, people being able to use this kind of remote operator mechanisms to simulate presence through intermediaries. This is very often the case with VPNs, for example. Then we have origin laundry and documentary substitution. This is also a big case here in Europe because we've been having a lot of police and border guard operations on counterfeit items that are relabeled. They come from China, they are made in China or in North Africa, and then suddenly they are relabeled in Italy and the Netherlands, and we don't know anymore where they come from, and this usually poses a big risk to European security in many forms. I'm talking about food, medicine, even raw materials. Then we have another interesting case of signal manipulation and interference. Recently, we've known cases of Russian ships that are able to spoof correct routes in the Baltics when they're actually deviating to Kaliningrad. So for Finnish or Estonian maritime controls, they see a ship in their radars, but the ship doesn't exist in real life. So yeah, that's another very interesting scenario. Then we have record opacity and asymmetric access. This is the case for people who actually try to gather evidence, especially from from public sources and online platforms like social media. Everything is scattered and very hard to compel. And then we have the jurisdiction ambiguity and interference overreach, which is also a very similar case for social media platforms when they operate across many jurisdictions. And suddenly when we have to contest evidence that they possess, they can just say, well, my jurisdiction is in some other place. There's no legal basis here. And across all of this, there's actually a very structural asymmetry, which is that location-linked claims are very cheap to assert, but then the verification is very costly. And of course, the adversaries then they exploit the gaps between what is a claim and then what is evidence. It's very easy to now fabricate a reality, and for authorities, it's super hard to reconstruct and actually see what is true. And I don't know if you can see this image, but this is the actual map of everything that we've researched in this paper. So from the left, you can see a lot of scenarios where cheap assertion and costly verification is a reality, from democratic processes. For example, the elections in Romania were a big case for this. Trade and supply chains, as I was mentioning, the fabrication of documentation. Financial case for the cryptocurrency platforms that are out there. Mobility, and the private sphere arm is also a big one emerging. So if you are not personally concerned, you should be, because nowadays it's so easy to fabricate a deepfake of you committing a crime, or the biggest phenomenon is pornographic deepfakes of politicians, for example. And this all boils down to the same situation. Is this content true? Was this content made through reality? Did this thing happen in space and time? And from there, we derive those failure scenarios that I just described. And of course, we also try and attempt to suggest a solution. In this case, we think that there's an emerging pattern for a design space, which we call contestability under dispute, being able to meaningfully contest the evidentiary basis of content that circulates on the internet. And from there, we derive a couple of design principles and governance objectives for next generation of digital trust infrastructure, starting with contestability by design, proportionality and rights compatibility, because of course you should be able to prove that something is real but not be overly monitored, separation of roles between who wants to prove something, who asserts that something is true, and then who verifies that this thing is true. Eventually, accountability for delegations. So if someone mandates you to gather a proof, well, there should be accountability links for that. Resilience to laundering. Otherwise, things could just be easily reused across different contexts and then lose their meaningful basis. Portability across borders. So if I claim that I'm somewhere, this statement should mean the same for everyone in the world and not just for us in this room. And then governance grade auditability. Otherwise, there's evidence, but we cannot access it. And from here, we derive a set of infrastructure capabilities that eventually will turn into what we call a solution space for next generation digital trust infrastructure. And this, we present proof of location as a new capability layer for European digital trust infrastructure. Proof of location is an emerging cryptographic field of new protocols and mechanisms that allow a prover to generate a proof that he or she was somewhere at some point in time, anchored in the testimony of nearby witnesses that can attest to the proximity and authenticity of the claims, so that the prover could then later convince a verifier that this was true, that he was somewhere at some point in time. And proof of location is eventually boils down to becoming an electronic certificate that attests one's position in both space and time. And a lot of the proof of location protocols out there, they are technical protocols that usually assert a couple of properties. First is spatiotemporal soundness, meaning that it should be very hard for a prover to prove that he is somewhere if he was not there. Then there's completeness, means that, well, if everyone is honest, then the prover can get a proof that he was there, witnesses can attest to it, and a verifier can verify it. And correctness means that if both of those are true, then we actually get a nice reality where proofs of location can assert what is true in physical world.
Oh, sorry. You still have 2 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, so it's my last slide actually. But yeah, this research goes towards imagining what could be, again, the next generation of European digital trust infrastructure. Most of it, if it's to be rights preserving and proportional, we imagine it as a sort of overlay, decentralized proof of location platform where users, citizens would have the right to create location proofs about the content of their realities and be able to use it across many sectors.
Sorry.
It's okay.
You still have time.
Yeah. From smart mobility, account auditability to, for example, digital content authenticity, supply chain accountability, and many others. So the key point of all of this is, or the main argument is that we believe that we should start treating location as a new digital primitive. So for all of this evidence-bearing claims about high-impact decisions in reality. So we should also stop thinking that we should disprove what is false and instead start proving what is real. And this is our main claim. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apologies for all the noises. I didn't realize that my timer would make noise at the end. Then I think that our next speaker is online. Professor, I'm sorry for my pronunciation, Professor Gugu is an associate professor at the School of Philosophy at the University of Inner Mongolia, which is close to the country Mongolia, within China. Is he indeed online? Yes. We are busy getting you on screen.
Yeah.
And there you are.
Okay.
And could you please introduce?
Yeah, I will. Sure, I will share my share my screen. You can see my slide now.
Yeah, we see you. We see your slides, but.
Oh,
yeah.
sorry. I can see me, right? Because I didn't have my camera right now. I'm using my computer, not laptop. So sorry, you can't see me, but you can see my slide. And I think, yeah, that's partly enough for me to give my presentation.
We can see your slides, but maybe you can put them on full screen.
Yeah, I have put it on full screen. Can you see it of this full scenery?
Okay, it works
I
like
see.
this.
Okay. Well, hi guys. I'm sorry that I can't to attend this conference in person because some China regulation have the restriction of the presence. But I'm really glad that you can give me this chance to introduce my current work on the techno-theology. Actually, this work is that partly I've done in recently in the Tohoku University, which I belong to in the past 1 year. Okay, skip it. Well, this paper I'll try to reconstruct the techno-theology from a standpoint beyond modern dualism, such as spirit and matter, and human and non-human. This is a long tradition in the philosophy. And in this paper, it will argue that techno-theology is not simply a new religious movement, but a conceptual lens for analyzing how technologies come to mediate ultimate concern and reconfiguring accounts of meanings, agents, and moral responsibility. All right, the first one I would to introduce why this come from. You may see on the right side. Are you follow me? Are you go with me? I'm sorry, can you see my slide move on?
No, we're still seeing the first.
Really? Sorry, I don't know why. If I
yes, we now see the next slide.
That's right. Okay, so this may be a lag here. All right. So can you see the right part? This is a presentation given by Stephen Cave. Maybe someone know him. That he's director of Cambridge Flammable Intelligent Future Center. So in that presentation, he raised the concern that early AI ethics issues were positioned within the category of toe ethics. And subsequently, the human-AI relationship shifted towards teaming ethics, in which training is expected to steer AI's behavior towards good and approach akin to how humans manage domesticated animals. So today, we as LLM says and the other AIs, AI has begun to exhibit certain agent link features. So the ethical models as a concern are moving closer to a companion ethics paradigm. Like we are no longer treated such like a toe or such like an animal we are treating like before. We are making it like a colleague or something else. So it's called companion ethics. So in the future, as he said, if AI capabilities continue to advance, the human-AI relationship may develop future towards divine ethics. So this, after I've heard that this presentation, even though I'm not in China at that time, but I'm still wondering what is divine ethics. So in the paper, I try to give a definition. So in this paper, divine does not mean the restoration of a monotheistic identity. Rather, it refers to the thickness of density of the relationship minimum in which paradigms, namely a normal generating space. So its emergence from within relationships themselves. So according to this concept, not written to religion authority, but ethically proposed for reconfiguring the responsibility within relational context. So I believe that divine ethics is not such as the model of that we are beyond the paradigm of companion ethics, kind of like the combination between the companion ethics and the divine ethics. All right, I'm going to the next slide, so maybe a little lag, but I can add this first. So this article argues that breaking the resulting paths does not require choosing between scalarizing and demoralizing technology. Instead,
we still see your second slide, Professor.
Yeah, I see. I'm zoom in, and you may see the next one. Okay, I see it's changed.
Yeah, perfect.
All right.
We see it now. Thanks.
Okay, I will zoom it up. Sorry. So as you can see, the article argues that techno-theology is now a new religious movement, but analytical lens for describing this mediation. It's found that much Western techno-theological discourse repeatedly oscillated between the technological, adulatory, and nostalgical appeals to scarcity authority, while remaining shaped by rationality's binaries that separates mind from world and human from their technological others. So this study will combine conceptual geology from Bill Jeff to debate on the imago dance in a technological age. So it's also will comparatively reconstructing drawing on the Japanese techno-animism, and we are placing these materials in dialogue with the Accelerated Age debates and transhumanism and posthumanism. Well, it's concluded by developing a relationship techno-theology centered on the interdependence. So, all in all, on this basis, this article proposes a relational cross-cultural theology of technology. It will further ground in interdependence and moral responsibility. And it will also involve re-enchantment, which is the approach that consciousness, not as scalarization of device, but as inquire into how technological companion can become occasion for renewed reflection on identity, meaning, responsibility in a technological saturated form of life. Okay. So, all right, change. So, what's technology theology? It's about what 2020, the scholar called Daniel Passini offer an explicit definition. Techno-theology is accessory for understanding that human role in a technological age through the matrix of imago Dei. So yet to bear the imago Dei, or put different, to play God. Play God is maybe become more familiar in a clinic or in another situation, like when you are be a doctor and doing surgery on patients, you are playing God. You can determine the patient's life or death based on not just knowledge but the skills or nothing else. So that's me playing God. Is that not more than legitimate technological enhance humanity as beyond ordinary humanity? It also expresses a deep confidence in ultimate mastery over scale law or nature order. So the danger is that human ethical law is replaced by a data-driven law. So once detached from God, technological empowered human, they come to regard themselves as a supreme nature law as such, and enter into the cosmological horizon promoted by transhumanism. I will say that transhumanism give us a more explanation of this term, but I wonder if some of you have familiar with this term, transhumanism. So Taylor argues that techno-theology in transhumanist context shifts the center of meaning from human to transferable data, bending a world of perceived technological miracle to the self as lived in phenomenological experience. So the transition from traditional theological reasoning to transhuman ontology that describe a form of re-enchantment. Enchantment is highlights a changing structure of meaning in society, overturn older humanism assumptions, and foster new mode of religion expression together with post-humanist formation of meaning. So that's imago Dei should be.
2 more minutes.
Yeah, humanism.
Okay, thank you.
And I will move on. So let's see what transhumanism approve and what is it's want to transfer old humanism to another stage. Let's see, as they said, that death, diseases, and negative emotions, that even moral crisis, can appear as trends imposed by nature and thus as candidates for removal. So this is a trend as many other anthropologists and philosophies, and you name it. As one of which natures that humans' routines delegates moral and practical responsibility to artifacts that act on their behavior. So what's happened related from the social network. So yes, this view of foremost compromise among human and non-human actors. So that's the trend like the other, I see the other articles and the other scholars post that we are not as human before. This scholars like Donna Haraway's and others were treating like us beyond humans or no humans or the others. That's it. Latour said we are actors. Okay. So what this matters?
Professor, could you try to conclude?
Yeah, so let's keep to the conclusion. Sorry, I missed a bit of time or so I'll go from this slide. So have you used the Aquinas' word to give a conclusion here? What is to be believed, knowledge of what to be desired, and knowledge of what to be done? So the answer, I will use another paper's word to give the answer. So you can see the highlight of only one thing we may be confidence. If man cans to escape its programmed self-extinction, the God who saved us will not descend from the machine. He will rise up again in the human soul. So I will try to, actually in this paper, I will try to introduce the techno-animism of Japan. How do they treat in a different way than the Western tradition? But actually I don't have running out of time, so I don't have to spend more. But actually this paper has been published, so maybe someone who are interested in this one, you can download this paper in this journal. All right. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you very much, Professor. I hope you can still hear us. And here in Brussels, we're going to go to the next presentation by Àndrés, who's a postdoc at the law faculty of the Universidad Pontificia in Madrid, right?
Yeah.
In Spain. And he has worked for a long time at VUB, the Free University Brussels, which is the same university that organizes CPDP for at least 15 years. And he's still also a fellow of the Brussels Privacy Hub, which is connected to the Free University Brussels. Àndrés, the floor is yours.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Frederick, for the presentation. Honestly, I feel that being the last paper to be presented and dealing with such mundane matters as money, I feel almost like I'm bothering all of you with this presentation. But no, I mean, this paper basically is part of an ongoing research that I'm conducting in Madrid, dealing with data spaces. I'm using the financial data space as a case study to explore different issues dealing with how the European Union is trying to reconfigure how data flows around the internal digital single market. A little bit because of my training, before jumping into academia, I was a practitioner. I focused a lot on banking law, and I kind of carried that along with me to my research. My supervisor hated that. He always told me that I was a banking lawyer trying to pose as a scholar. In the end, I managed to become a scholar because I got a PhD, but still Paul calls me like a banking lawyer in the end. But jokes aside, I think that it happened. I was participating in a panel earlier today dealing with the digital euro. And I think that in general, there is a little bit of a misconception, or not misconception, but a little bit of a lack of clarity when it comes to exactly what we're dealing when we discuss about data and the financial services sector. Drawing a lot on social sciences, particularly financial geography, there are a lot of scholars working around these topics, and clearly, right now we can kind of agree that money basically is data. Except with the limited use of cash that is being constantly attacked, basically all financial transactions have been digitized in one way or another, and we're dealing with basically data. An interesting part of this is that money and financial transactions in general are not only just about the idea of moving value from one place to the other, but actually they enable a lot of things, particularly when it comes to money. No, you can use, I mean, in the end, basically we use money to pay for example, we donate to a political party, we contribute to a church. It reveals a lot of interesting things about us, especially for people who want to get in that knowledge, know exactly who we are. So that demands a little bit of certain respect when it comes to how we are going to be processing all this information. Voilà. So trying to put a little bit of context exactly where the European financial data space emerges. It's not an isolated piece of legislation. It's not an isolated policy action from the Commission. It resonates a lot with the whole strategy dealing with the European data strategy, the idea of trying to create data spaces. I don't know how many of you are aware of the notion of data spaces, but just as a very brief summary, the idea is to create let's call it a seamless digital area, as the Commission likes to put it, where data can move freely. These data spaces will be governed by governance rules, either legislation or even contracts, etc. It also set the economic conditions for which money will be data will move around, some limitations, some technical specifications, etc. No, it's an amalgamation of things. One of the areas that we were receiving a data space, or at least the Commission is trying to push a data space, is in the case of finance. And in the case of finance, there are two particularities that I'd like to highlight. First, that in contrast to other areas, the financial service sector is building on previous efforts under the name of open banking. For those who are not aware, open banking was basically the idea that information about payments should move around freely between banks and fintech firms, basically companies dedicated to technology who want to offer different services to help make payments or to control how your payments are being made. So building on this idea, the Payment Services Directive 2, the Commission is pushing forward a very aggressive legislative package composed of basically two pieces of legislation: the Financial Information Data Access Regulation, if I got the acronym right, FIDA, and then the update to PSD2 under two different legal rules: Payment Services Directive 3, dealing with more the member state stuff of how these entities are being authorized in each country, and then the Payment Services Regulation that is governing more on the single market for data aspects of how data flows within financial services. Yeah, voila. Basically, this kind of leaves us with a very complex and broad aspect of what is the financial data space. And you can see there are basically four pillars: open finance, embodied by FIDA; open banking with PSD3 and PSR; and then the European Single Access Point and the reporting system. The last two, I'm not going to be focusing in the presentation. They are a little bit described in the paper. What I'm interested in for the presentation, and particularly for the paper, are that these two, FIDA and PSR, at least when they were proposed by the Commission, they rely on the notion of permission to enable the sharing of data within this context. Why am I focusing on this? Because on the previous legislation, especially PSD2, the notion that was being used to enable the free flow of information within that context was consent. And there was a lot of literature dealing with this issue. There was actually guidelines by the European Data Protection Board dealing exactly how to interpret that notion of consent in that particular context. In the end, it was basically argued that consent is the consent to the contract for which the services are being delivered, and not the consent as understood under GDPR. The thing is that in that context, it made relatively sense because, I mean, in the end, it was just basically facilitating the provision of new services. But the issue is that when we switch, particularly to FIDA, the possibilities expand. And we are not just in the position of delivering new products and services, like it happened with open banking, but also we are, or at least the idea, particularly in FIDA, is to enable the compliance of legal obligations. Let's think, for example, when a bank has to comply with building your dossier for anti-money laundering purposes, no? Or, and this is the more interesting part, that is being pushed via this legislation, is the idea of developing new AI systems, no? Of course, I have to put the AI word, even if I'm dealing with consent and permission and all of that, but that's the issue, no? It's trying to push towards that. So the main issue at hand is, what is this permission, no? Basically, this permission, we have to understand it as, this in the proposals and some of the position of the Parliament and the Council, basically as an active action from a financial services user that can be revoked at any time. And the important thing is, in both pieces of legislation, is that they make this distinction between permission is one thing in this context, and then you have to comply with your obligations under GDPR. And suddenly we find ourselves in a sort of short circuit between trying to make this a reconciliation between what is permission and legal basis under GDPR. If we look into what is permission under this conceptualization that I just made, it resonates a lot with consent, no? It's an active action by a user that can be revoked at any time. The thing is that it lacks all the other requirements that characterizes consent. It doesn't talk about being free, it doesn't talk about being unambiguous, it doesn't talk about being specific, it doesn't talk about being informed, but it sort of assumes that situations. So just for the sake of the logic of the paper, kind of my premise is that, how can we translate this? And my logic is, okay, let's say that we go down the route of considering this permission as consent, no? we enter this. Meta versus the German authority, the German competition authority, and the implications that it had in that context. No, basically, in a nutshell, I'm trying to keep up with the time. In that decision, basically, it was argued that having an invalid consent could result in an infringement to competition law, and then it caused the whole situation where it was a situation of an abuse of dominant position, etc. So, kind of my logic in the paper is that if we can take the same logic that was applied in Meta versus the German Competition Authority to the context of the European financial data space, and we start to see that there are a lot of situations that they're not the same, but there are a couple of red flags that are being raised. We suddenly see that in certain countries, for example, let's say the Baltics, let's say Portugal, let's say Spain, there is a high concentration when it comes to banks. There are a couple of banks that concentrate most of the market share. And suddenly we are entering to this sort of, there is a possibility of a dominant position that can be abused in that sense. For example, in Spain, there has been a lot of decisions from the Data Protection Agency imposing fines on banks because they didn't collect valid consent or they weren't providing information to the data subjects. So we are seeing that, just in the paper I go in much more detail, and I'm trying to keep on the time, but you can see that it appears to, emerge certain red flags when it comes to this. So, kind of the purpose, and of course, I couldn't name a paper, Mission Impossible, and not put a picture of Tom Cruise, sorry, of Mission Impossible. It was there. Kind of the last part of the paper goes into analyzing the different mechanisms that are in place, especially in FIDA, to try to balance this and try to see if these mechanisms contribute in one way to actually mitigate these possible competition law issues that will have a repercussion when it comes to data protection. So in that sense, we see that these regulations propose, for example, the creation of this new figure that the financial information service providers, which are not defined, they're extremely vague when it comes to the definition, but perhaps the idea of allowing third parties to enter and sort of negotiate between who wants to use data and the data users might be a way to actually circumvent this issue of the possible abuse of dominant position. Just to, again, trying to keep up with the time, the idea of the permission dashboard, the idea of allowing users to have a sort of a real-time control of exactly how the information is being used in this context might also be a tool that would help to mitigate or at least contribute to having a stronger consent in this case. And then there are two particular situations that also resonate with these situations of possible dominant positions found in financial services, which are the data sharing schemes, basically the contract that is going to govern how data, I'm just wrapping up, how data is being shared and how data is governed in this context. Suddenly, if we go back to what I said before, that suddenly we have markets where there is a high market concentration with certain banks, and suddenly these banks are the ones who are setting the terms of how data can be used. Suddenly we encounter ourselves in a sort of a cartel situation, no? So you see that the situations where these three different pieces of legislation, financial services regulation, data protection, and competition law, interact in a single context is, one, extremely dynamic, and at the second time, it shows that if one of these pieces of the puzzle kind of is missing, or one of the cards in the house of cards suddenly falls, it all comes crumbling down. Particularly if we rely on a consent-based permission, no? And part of the kind of the end of the paper, I sort of argue that perhaps it's not the best idea to rely on a consent-based permission. Perhaps we need to, have this permission as a sort of a safeguard, and then rely on other legal bases, for example, particularly for the training of AI systems, like legitimate interest or any other legal basis that might be more robust to survive the requirements that consent has, which in a particular case might not be achieved. And with that, of course, if anybody is interested in reading the full paper, happy to share it, since it's still in the works. I'm looking forward to your questions, and I think that I am on time.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And that's it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you also for the good timekeeping, and thanks to all the speakers. And it's fun to see how this panel illustrates the interdisciplinary approach of CPDP in general, because we also had computer science, law, ethics, and
a bit of everything, social sciences.
Yeah. Questions or no remarks? I prefer questions from the audience. Yes, let's take two questions and then we go back to the panel members.
Hello, I have a question for Àndrés regarding the relationship between the European Financial Data Spaces, the proposal, and Data Act and Data Governance Act in terms of this idea of permission as a preferred kind of lawful basis for using this data in this context. Do you see some kind of disagreements? I mean, misalignments between, the Data Governance Act, Data Act approach, and the approach we are seeing in data spaces, particularly in the European finance data space?
Thank you. And we had one more. Could you?
Well, to follow up on that question for you, Àndrés, as well, what about performance of a contract as some possible legal basis for some of the operations involved in this data transfer in these spaces? As I was wondering, since most of banking operations are based on contracts, what about considering for some operations as their legal basis?
Thank you. And Àndrés, could I also check what you were presenting? Were these proposals for a digital? Proposals, not adopted regulations yet. And I'm going to ask a quick question to Giulia and to Eduardo. Or maybe it's easier if you first answer.
As you wish.
You answer first.
Relatively short.
Yeah.
So, just going in backwards order, just to answer, because I think that's particularly relevant for context. Right now, these two main pieces of legislation, FIDA and PSR, they're both still in the proposal phase. However, important disclaimer. When it comes to PSR, there has been already agreement between in the trilogues. There is a final text which hasn't been adopted yet. Yeah. So, and in particular in that case, it's a sort of, I didn't go into the presentation because it was opening up pretty much the Pandora box on that. But the issue is that we're going to be seeing another short circuit between these two pieces of legislation, because in PSR, they return from permission to consent. And basically, they are committing the same mistakes as before with PSD2. While on FIDA, they're still relying on the notion of permission. Why? Honestly, this as the politician, because, yeah. And on FIDA, it's still in the proposal phase, but there are positions from the Parliament and the Council suggesting certain changes, particularly when it comes to the role of big techs in this context. For your question on the reliance of performance of contract, I should have been a little bit more clear when it comes to what I was focusing on the paper, particularly in focusing on the third possibility of using this data space for developing new AI systems. Of course, if it's just for the performance of the delivery of a product or a service, performance of a contract is the most sensible, legal basis from a GDPR perspective. And on Pablo, I wouldn't say that there is a misalignment between the legislations. Actually, for example, FIDA allows data intermediaries under the DGA to operate the permission dashboards or offer the permission dashboards. So we're seeing actually a little bit of an interplay. But if you ask me, the interplay should have been even it should have been more clear and more explicit. For example, these financial information service providers, they're basically intermediation services, and they should have been also those are conceived under the DGA. Basically, it was a possibility to give a little bit more meaning to the DGA, and I think that it was missed. And in the position from the Parliament and the Council, it's still being missed, that interconnection between legislation.
Thank you. I note, by the way, that you have a very specific niche here. Most data protection lawyers don't understand anything about financial regulations. It's good that you are focusing.
It's my
on
niche.
that niche. Yes. More questions from the audience for now? No? Well, you think I'm going to ask a question to both Giulia and to Eduardo. Namely, to Giulia, it looks pretty depressing what you presented, and I was wondering whether you had any advice for policymakers or from NGOs, like what should NGOs lobby for, or what should policymakers do? And for you, Eduardo, I had a question. You mentioned, for instance, the possibility of anybody making deep fake porn of random people or from politicians. And I was wondering, is then the location is that the main issue? Or my first intuition would be, no, there's other issues more important. Who wants to go first? Giulia?
Sure. Thank you so much, Frederick. I also cut it a bit short earlier because I was worried about taking time from my colleagues. That's definitely a good question. Unfortunately, it does feel a bit depressing sometimes.
We're used to that. That's easy.
Right? But we do have, let me start by saying this is a starting project. We started about 7 months ago. This is our first paper together, so it's a work in progress, and I really look forward to the data collection phase where we actually go and collect some empirical data, especially through qualitative and participatory methods to kind of see if our hypotheses and desk-based research and case studies make some sense also with what people experience, and then also with talking with different stakeholders. If what we've found so far actually get some evidence through the empirical research, some of the things that we suggest that need to be implemented are purpose limitation for real. So when you see that interoperability can actually undermine the GDPR principle of purpose limitation, we need to find ways to limit the repurposing of data. We also need to probably produce unified redress routes, because when the data is then scattered in different databases and accountability is diluted, right, in different actors, it also becomes more difficult to ask for redress. So maybe a unified data route that allows people to ask redress for what we were talking about earlier, like bad data points, could be one of the ways. Also, we believe that auditing interoperability is going to be important, so that interoperability should be understood not just as a technical, solution that simplifies everything, but as a deeply political choice that needs to be continuously assessed. And finally, we also believe that something that would be important is to maintain the possibility of opting out for real. So maintaining the possibility of non-digital alternatives. And I know that it may sound a bit ludist and a bit, but if I'm thinking, when you are forced to access healthcare, your healthcare information and services through an online service, and you live, for example, in rural Brazil, where a strong rain can completely shut down the electrical system, you don't have Wi-Fi. So you just don't have access to that information, that service, right? So this is what I think makes it important to also keep these non-digital alternatives as one of the ways. Yeah.
I thank you, and I fully agree. And also in the Netherlands, by the way, where we typically don't have problems with electricity use, but I also think it's very important to always ensure that people can call somebody or talk to somebody rather than doing everything online.
Certainly,
Yeah.
certainly. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. With that statement, actually, I jumped a bunch of reasoning loops, but for sure, if we start thinking of how we could actually prevent fabrication of content in such way, then we eventually have to think how things happen in the first place in reality. So somebody actually recording a real, let's say, scene would have to exist at some point in place and time and record it in front of real cameras. So for deepfakes, is the other way around, is that somebody fabricated you in an act of something. So the point of all of these mechanisms is actually to make it increasingly harder to fabricate, because if you try to fabricate something that you want people to believe it's true, then with these mechanisms, you'd have to have a proof that it was actually true and that something happened. So this increases the cost of fabrication. And this is all anchored in the fact that you get a location proof of proximity or existence in some place, both in space and time. Yeah, so for deepfakes, that's the reasoning. There's actually a lot of initiatives on content provenance. So there's a couple of mechanisms to add proofs of inalteration of pictures in the internet through hashes and other mechanisms that, for example, prove or disprove that you've edited a picture. But they are still prone to a lot of attack vectors. One is, for example, scene spoofing. I can take a picture of a picture. Doesn't make the picture real. So content provenance misses the actual reasoning step of anchoring this in reality, especially when we want to assert that something really happened. So for deepfakes, that's the actual reasoning.
Yeah, I understand better now. By the way, we know from the professor from China, your paper is published already. Congratulations. And could you each turn by turn say what is the status of your paper? Is it like a preprint or is it still?
Our paper, it's for now, it's just a preprint, but actually, I don't think we have it online yet, but we can definitely, if you follow our LinkedIn page or datagov.net website, we will announce when it's online and available.
Okay, and we help you hope for reasonable peer reviewers.
Yeah.
And you?
To be absolutely honest, it's been a draft for quite a long time, and I kind of use the conference as an opportunity to like put the final like clippings in there, and I'll see if maybe next week or the other one, if it happen that it is submitted somewhere.
Conferences are always good to remind yourself of deadlines. Yes, smart.
Because otherwise, I mean, I'm stuck in this loop of it may be improved here, it might be improved here. Like it's not clear enough. So but at some point, you have to do it.
Smart approach. And you're?
Yeah, and we also have a huge line of research now emerging, also on the technical mechanisms that enable all this magic that I just talked about to be actually true with actual cryptographic protocols that would attest this. So this is not just the imagination and could actually become tangible infrastructures. So yeah, this is part of a long line of papers that have been and are.
But this is
being
out
published.
already, your paper, or?
Yeah, this one. Yeah.
Congrats. And is it part of your PhD
Yeah,
project?
eventually.
Okay,
Yeah. The first one to actually warn people that these are real risks that we should tackle. Yeah, then the other ones are more technical.
Good. Always fun to hear people present drafts. Yes. Two quick questions, and then everybody. We have 5 minutes left, so let's try to be at toot length.
Thank you.
Toot are tweets on Mastodon.
A question for Eduardo. So thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if you can expand a bit about the notion of privacy within your concept, because I saw that you have some boxes there, but if you can expand a bit more on how you ensure the protection of privacy, and also in context of what could, unless I'm mistaken, could lead to constant location verification with your setup. So I was just wondering whether you can touch on those points.
Thank you. First, we take the other question. And I remind everybody, I'm going to be strict when we're stopping the panel, but most of the panel members are also around after. One more question?
I have a question for Eduardo too. I'm new to this field of study, but I'm curious. I understand the trustworthy and secure digital systems, but how would you visualize a user-centric privacy-enhancing technology to look like? Just at a decentralized user level, not at like a dispute resolution, claim assertion, geopolitical level, but like at my individual user level, how would you visualize a simple privacy-enhancing technology and verification system?
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Both. Actually, both questions are tied. We also have a paper on this specific topic of privacy-preserving location proofs. And first time to the user level, it's actually a very interesting topic of how to semantically encode this kind of proofs. Because we, as humans, we would say something like, oh, I want to prove that I am in this room presenting this to someone else. And this is the bounded statement. I would have to have evidence that I'm inside this room at this point in time talking to all of you. And there should be nothing else that I need to prove because the statement was this. So in terms of privacy, first I assume that this is the bounded statement that I want to prove. Nothing else needs to be said about my proof. And there are mechanisms that allow this to be somehow encrypted. We have a paper on zero knowledge proof of location, which allows to actually constrain the provability system into just proving in a privacy preserving way these bounded statements. And so this also allows us humans to encode high level English statements into a privacy preserving proof, because at the end I just proved what I wanted to prove, that I was in this room, and that's it. Yeah, we had the case of Estonia. Estonia wanted to give subsidies for electric cars, but people would have to prove that they drove more than 80,000 kilometers in Estonia. This was the statement, but we had to collect all people's geographic coordinates to bound this into a statement. So yeah, these are the kind of mechanisms that would allow to just prove, yes, I drove 80,000 kilometers, and you don't need to know my location. Yeah, so there's definitely research on that.
Okay, in that case, a big round of applause for the speakers here.